The girl, already weakened, collapses to the ground and faints in front of the hospital door. But at that moment, a man watching everything from afar, a millionaire disguising his presence among the other patients, decides to act. He, the owner of the hospital, sees something familiar in the girl, something that stirs his memory and causes him pain.
Chapter 1. The Encounter. The scorching Miami sun punished the streets of the South Beach neighborhood that summer afternoon. The asphalt seemed to melt under the bare feet of Sophia, a girl of just 8, who staggered along the sidewalk, clutching her stomach with small, dirty hands. Her curly hair, tangled and uncut for months, stuck to her forehead with the sweat of the fever that consumed her. For 3 days, Sophia had felt that growing pain, but today it was unbearable, as if something inside her were about to explode. People hurried past, some averting their gaze, others pretending not to see the child who could barely stay on her feet. Sophia had nowhere to go. Ever since her mother had been taken to a shelter after falling gravely ill, she had wandered the streets, sleeping on cardboard under awnings and feeding on what she could find in the trash cans of the expensive beachfront restaurants. Ahead of her, as imposing as a monument to social inequality, stood St. Christopher's Hospital, the most luxurious in Florida. Its mirrored glass walls reflected the sun, almost blinding anyone who looked directly at the facade. It was a place for the rich, for the powerful, for those who could afford health care. Sophia knew this, but the pain gave her no choice. With faltering steps, she crossed the street, ignoring the angry honk of a BMW driver who nearly ran her over. The contrast was stark. On one side, the suffocating heat of the street, poverty, indifference. On the other, the air conditioning, the polished marble, the exclusivity. Sophia pushed the revolving door with difficulty and entered the hospital's chilled lobby. The cold air made her shiver, mixing the artificial chill with the fever's shudders. "Please, I need help," she murmured, approaching the reception desk, where a woman with impeccably straightened hair was typing something on her computer. Victoria Caldwell, the head receptionist at St. Christopher's, looked up from her perfectly manicured nails and wrinkled her nose at the sight of the girl. Her 15 years working there had given her what she called a clinical eye for distinguishing who belonged in that environment and who did not. "Little girl, this isn't a public hospital. Go to County General," Victoria said, not bothering to hide the disdain in her voice. "We don't treat vagrants." Sophia didn't understand the word vagrants, but she perfectly understood the tone. It was the same one she heard when she tried to enter the mall stores to escape the heat. "But it hurts so much," she insisted, tears streaming down her dirty face. "Please, ma'am." "I already said no. You'll dirty the floor that was just polished. Miami-Dade County General is 20 minutes from here. Get going before I call security." On the other side of the spacious lobby, sitting discreetly in one of the Italian leather armchairs, a man was observing the scene. Arthur Miller, 58, was more than just a patient waiting for an appointment. He was the owner of St. Christopher's and a network of hospitals that stretched across the entire American South. His face, normally featured in business magazines and society columns, was partially hidden behind a magazine he pretended to read. Arthur had no intention of identifying himself today. He just wanted a routine checkup before traveling to Europe, where he would spend the holidays with his wife Beatrice, who was due to arrive at any moment. But something about that girl captured his attention in a way he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the curly hair, similar to that of Louise, his daughter who had left this world 5 years ago, a victim of a rare disease that not even all his money could cure. Perhaps it was the child's fragility, contrasting with the coldness of the environment he himself had created. Sophia stumbled, leaning against the marble counter. The pain was now like 1,000 knives piercing her abdomen. She could no longer stand. "I told you to get out. You're going to make a mess of everything." Victoria raised her voice, standing up and gesturing toward the security guard who was near the door. It was at that moment that Sophia, with no strength left to plead, collapsed onto the cold marble floor. Her frail little body convulsed one last time before becoming still, her breathing shallow and rapid. The scene paralyzed the lobby. Some waiting patients murmured among themselves, but no one moved to help. The security guard took 2 hesitant steps, looking to Victoria for instructions. "Someone call an ambulance to take her to a public hospital," Victoria said, sitting back down. "We can't handle charity cases here." It was then that the revolving door moved again, giving way to Beatrice Miller. Tall, thin, her 50 years, very well disguised by expensive cosmetic procedures. She wore a designer dress and imported shoes that cost more than the receptionist's annual salary. Beatrice froze at the sight of the girl lying near the reception. Her face, always composed and elegant, twisted into an expression of disgust and indignation. "What is this? Since when did St. Christopher's become a homeless shelter?" she exclaimed, loud enough for everyone to hear. Her eyes scanned the lobby until they found her husband, still seated now with the magazine lowered and his gaze fixed on the unconscious child. "Arthur, are you seeing this? Someone needs to remove this girl from here." Arthur didn't answer. Something was happening inside him, a painful memory, a feeling long buried under layers of cynicism and business pragmatism. He saw Louise in that girl. He saw his daughter in her final weeks of life, when not even the best specialists in the world could save her. "The poor don't come in here," Beatrice continued, walking carefully to avoid getting close to Sophia. "This hospital has a standard to maintain." Those words were like a slap in Arthur's face. He had heard them before from another mouth in another context, when he was desperately trying to find experimental treatment for Louise abroad. "I'm sorry, Mr. Miller, but we don't take on terminal cases. We have a standard to maintain." Without a second thought, Arthur stood up. His body, still strong despite his age, moved with a determination he hadn't felt in years. He crossed the lobby in long strides, ignoring the surprised looks and Beatrice's call. When he reached Sophia, he knelt beside her, touching her feverish forehead. "Get Dr. Richards immediately," he ordered, with the calm but authoritative voice he used in board meetings. "Prepare the emergency room." Victoria, finally recognizing who was giving the orders, stammered, "Mr. Miller, with all due respect, this girl has no insurance, no documents, probably no family. The hospital's protocol—" "I am the protocol now," Arthur interrupted, lifting Sophia into his arms. She was so light he almost lost his balance, expecting more weight. He could feel the girl's ribs under her worn-out t-shirt. "And I say she will be treated. Immediately." Beatrice approached, her face a mask of indignation and shame. "Arthur, have you lost your mind? Put that girl down. You don't know where she's been, what diseases she might have. Besides, what will the other patients think?" Arthur looked at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. After 20 years of marriage, after the loss of Louise, they had become practically strangers who shared a mansion and social appearances. In that moment, the distance between them seemed greater than ever. "What I've lost, Beatrice, is too much time pretending not to see what happens in this hospital. What I've lost is the humanity we promised to offer when we opened the doors of St. Christopher's." Holding Sophia firmly in his arms, he began to walk toward the elevators that led to the surgical center. The girl, semi-conscious, briefly opened her eyes, meeting the determined gaze of the grey-haired gentleman who carried her as if she were his own daughter. "Everything's going to be okay, little one," Arthur murmured as the elevator doors opened. "I promise." Behind him, the lobby of St. Christopher's Hospital buzzed with whispers and speculation. Beatrice, paralyzed by public humiliation, watched helplessly as her husband disappeared into the elevator with that street girl in his arms, taking her where only premium patients had access. At that moment, no one could have predicted how everyone's life would be transformed by that unexpected encounter. Fate had intertwined the paths of Sophia and Arthur, and nothing would ever be the same at St. Christopher's Hospital. Chapter 2. The Decision. The surgical center at St. Christopher's Hospital was Arthur Miller's pride and joy. Equipped with the highest technology, it rivaled the best hospitals in Europe and the United States. Renowned doctors vied for the opportunity to work there, attracted as much by the astronomical salaries as by the professional prestige. It was in this immaculately white and sterile environment that Sophia, the little street girl, was placed on a gurney, still unconscious. Dr. Paul Richards, the hospital's chief surgeon and Arthur's personal friend, examined her quickly, his experienced face wrinkling with concern. A Acute appendicitis, possibly with imminent rupture, he diagnosed after palpating the girl's abdomen. We need to operate immediately, Arthur. A few more hours and we'd have generalized peritonitis. While the medical team prepared, Arthur remained by the gurney, watching Sophia's feverish face. A nurse gently tried to lead him away. "Mr. Miller, we need to prepare her for surgery. You can wait in the VIP waiting room." But Arthur didn't move. In his mind, flashes of memory were superimposed on the present scene. He saw Louise, his daughter, in her final moments before the operation that couldn't save her. He remembered how he had been called to an urgent business meeting that day, how he had left Beatrice alone at the hospital, prioritizing the empire he was building over the daughter he loved. "I'm staying until she goes into the operating room," he said firmly, leaving no room for argument. In the hallway, however, the tension was mounting. Beatrice had come up, followed by the hospital's administrative director, Oliver Myers, a middle-aged man with small, calculating eyes behind Italian-framed glasses. "Arthur, we need to talk," Oliver said, approaching cautiously. "I understand your compassion, but there are protocols. We at least need an identification for the patient, a guardian to sign the paperwork, a means of payment." "I am the guardian," Arthur cut in, without taking his eyes off Sophia. "And the means of payment is the hospital owner's account. Any problem with that, Oliver?" The administrative director turned pale, adjusting his tie as if it had suddenly become too tight. "None, Mr. Miller, absolutely none." Beatrice, however, was not willing to back down so easily. She approached her husband, lowering her voice to an irritated whisper. "Have you gone mad? First you carry a street girl in your arms, in front of everyone, and now you take responsibility for her. What do you think the press will say? What will our friends think?" Arthur finally turned to face her. His eyes, normally as cold and calculating as any successful businessman's, now burned with a mixture of anger and determination. "I'm tired of caring what they think, Beatrice. I'm tired of pretending this hospital is just a business. Do you remember why we built St. Christopher's? It was after we lost Louise. It was because we promised that no other family would go through what we went through as long as they could pay. But look at us now. Look at what we've become." The gurney began to be moved toward the operating room. Arthur followed it to the double doors where he had to stop. Dr. Richards placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll take good care of her, Arthur. You have my word." The doors closed, and Arthur stood still, looking at the red light that indicated surgery in progress. For a moment, everyone in the hallway, nurses, doctors, staff, froze watching the unusual scene. The powerful Arthur Miller, known for his business acumen, now seemed vulnerable, almost broken. Beatrice broke the silence. "Let's go home, Arthur. Let the doctors do their job. We can discuss this later calmly." "I'm not going anywhere until I know she's okay," he replied, heading to the waiting room adjacent to the surgical center, a space reserved for the families of patients in complex surgeries. Sitting in the leather armchair, Arthur finally had a moment to reflect on what he was doing. He didn't even know the girl's name, where she came from if she had a family. All he knew was that he couldn't let her die, couldn't be an accomplice to the indifference he himself had helped build. The hours passed slowly. Beatrice eventually gave up arguing and went home, promising the conversation wasn't over. Oliver disappeared discreetly, probably to manage the rumors that must have already been circulating through the hospital corridors. Almost 3 hours later, Dr. Richards came out of the operating room, still wearing his green scrubs. His face was tired, but there was a faint smile on his lips. "The surgery was a success, Arthur. We got there in time before the appendix ruptured completely. She's strong despite the obvious malnutrition and some other health issues we detected. She's being taken to the pediatric ICU, but I believe she'll be able to go to a room in 48 hours. Arthur felt a relief he hadn't experienced in years. It was as if a weight had been temporarily lifted from his shoulders. "When can I see her?" Paul looked at him with curiosity. In all their years of friendship, he had never seen Arthur so involved with a patient, not even when it came to important figures from politics or business. "In about an hour when she's stable in the ICU. Arthur, who is this girl?" "I don't know, Paul. I just know I couldn't let her die on my hospital's doorstep." The doctor nodded, understanding. He knew Louise's story. He had been one of the specialists consulted during her illness. He knew how much that loss had transformed his friend. We'll need to notify Child Protective Services. If she's a homeless child, there are legal procedures. Arthur hadn't thought of that. Suddenly, the reality of protocols and bureaucracy asserted itself again. When Sophia recovered, where would she go? Back to the streets, to some overcrowded, under-resourced shelter. The idea deeply disturbed him. "We can wait until she wakes up and tells us her story," Arthur suggested. "Maybe there's family, someone looking for her." But deep down he suspected there was no one. Sophia's condition, her malnutrition, the signs of long exposure to the sun and street life all pointed to an abandoned child, or, at best, one with a family unable to care for her properly. An hour later, as promised, Arthur was allowed into the pediatric ICU. The contrast between Sophia and the environment was even more stark there. Connected to monitors, with an oxygen cannula and an IV line, she seemed even smaller and more fragile against the hospital's crisp white sheets. Arthur approached cautiously, as if afraid of waking her. But to his surprise, the girl's eyes were open, watching him with a mixture of confusion and gratitude. "Hi," he said, sitting in the chair next to the bed. "How are you feeling?" Sophia hesitated, as if she wasn't used to adults asking about her well-being. "It doesn't hurt anymore," she finally answered, her voice small and hoarse. "Are you a doctor?" Arthur smiled, a genuine smile he hadn't used in a long time. "No, I'm not a doctor. My name is Arthur. What's yours?" "Sophia," she replied, her eyes scanning the ICU room, marveling at all the equipment and the understated luxury that characterized even this area of the hospital. "That's a beautiful name," Arthur said. "Sophia, do you have any family? Someone we can contact?" The girl looked away, fixing her gaze on the ceiling. "My mum is sick. They took her to a place for sick people, but they didn't let me go with her. She said she'd be back soon, but it's been a long time." Arthur felt a lump in his throat. The story was fragmented, told with the simplicity of an 8-year-old child, but it was enough to understand that Sophia had been separated from her mother and had somehow ended up alone on the streets. "Do you remember the name of that place or your mother's full name?" Sophia frowned, trying hard. "Mom's name is Janine Sanders. The place was big. There were a lot of people coughing. A hospital or clinic for tuberculosis, perhaps," Arthur thought, or some other type of institution for infectious diseases. Florida had a few, mostly in the poorer neighborhoods. "I'm going to help you find your mother, Sophia, I promise." The girl looked at him with suspicion. Promises from adults probably didn't mean much in her world. "You're rich, aren't you?" she asked, as direct as only children can be. "I saw your wife. She has shoes like on the TV shows." Arthur couldn't help but laugh, despite the situation. "Yes, I have money. In fact, this hospital is mine." Sophia's eyes widened. "All of this is yours, even the machines?" "Yes, even the machines," he confirmed, increasingly charmed by the girl's genuine curiosity. "Then why did that lady at the big desk say I couldn't come in? Aren't you the boss?" The question, in its innocent simplicity, hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. That was exactly it. He was the boss, he was the owner, he set the rules. And yet, he had allowed his hospital to become a place where children like Sophia were treated as unwanted intruders. "She was wrong, Sophia, very wrong, and that's going to change, I guarantee it." In that moment, Arthur made a decision that would change not only Sophia's life, but his own and everyone's around him. It wasn't just about helping a street girl. It was about rescuing the humanity he had lost on the path to business success, about honoring Louise's memory in a way that truly mattered. "Sophia, you're going to stay here until you're fully recovered, and in the meantime, I'm going to find your mother. You have my word." The girl studied him for a long moment, as if assessing the sincerity behind that promise. Finally, she nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "Thank you, Mr. Arthur." Outside, the ICU, the hospital, continued to function as usual, but a buzz of speculation ran through the corridors. The staff commented on the boss's unusual behavior, on the mysterious girl, on what this could mean for the future of St. Christopher's. In her mansion in Coral Gables, Beatrice paced back and forth furious, trying to understand what had happened to her husband. The phone wouldn't stop ringing, curious friends, society columnists sniffing out a story, partners worried about the great businessman's mental stability. And in the ICU bed, Sophia finally allowed herself to relax into a peaceful sleep, free from pain, and for the first time in a long time, with a faint thread of hope on the horizon. What no one knew, not even Arthur, was that this chance encounter between the powerful businessman and the street girl was about to trigger a series of revelations that would shake the foundations not only of St. Christopher's Hospital, but of all of Miami society. Chapter 3. Revelations. The news spread through Miami like wildfire. In less than 24 hours, all the local newspapers were reporting the episode. Healthcare magnate rescues street girl in his own hospital. The versions varied from sensationalism to admiration, with headlines ranging from Arthur Miller, philanthropist or marketing strategist, to Sophia's miracle, how a child transformed a businessman's heart. Sitting in his office on the top floor of St. Christopher's Hospital, Arthur watched the city through the panoramic window, while trying to ignore the dozens of messages and calls that kept coming in. He had spent a sleepless night, dividing his time between visits to the ICU to check on Sophia and calls to contacts who could help locate Janine Sanders. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Mrs. Eleanor, the housekeeper, who had worked for the Miller family for over 20 years. "Excuse me, sir. Mrs. Beatrice is downstairs and insists on speaking with you. She said if you don't come down, she's coming up here." Arthur sighed. He knew his wife well enough to know it wasn't an empty threat. "Tell her I'm on my way down, Eleanor." As the elevator descended to the ground floor, Arthur tried to organize his thoughts. He knew Beatrice would be furious, not just about the incident with Sophia, but because he had spent the night at the hospital instead of returning home. Beatrice was waiting for him in the main lobby, impeccably dressed as always, but with dark circles under her eyes that expensive makeup couldn't completely hide. Beside her was Oliver, the administrative director, with an expression that mixed embarrassment and concern. "Finally," Beatrice exclaimed upon seeing him, "I need to speak with you urgently, in private." "Good morning to you too, dear," Arthur replied, maintaining his calm. "Oliver, any news on the search for Sophia's mother?" The administrative director cleared his throat, uncomfortable at being caught between the couple. "We've contacted all the tuberculosis treatment hospitals and clinics in the region. There are 3, Janine's admitted, but none with the last name Sanders. We're expanding the search to shelters and other institutions. Keep looking, and I want reports every 2 hours on the progress." Beatrice grabbed her husband's arm. "Arthur, we need to talk now." He nodded, leading her to an empty meeting room on the first floor. As soon as the door closed, Beatrice exploded. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? Our life has become a circus in the last 24 hours. I've cancelled 3 events because I can't appear in public without being bombarded with questions about your street girl. The board is panicking, investors are calling for explanations, and you just disappear all night." Arthur watched her in silence. It was strange how he could now see Beatrice in a new light. When they had met, she was an idealistic young doctor, newly graduated and full of dreams of making a difference. When had she transformed into this woman obsessed with status and appearances? "Are you finished?" he asked, when she paused for breath. "Because if your concern is what people are thinking, I have news for you. I don't care anymore. It's not just that. Arthur, it's about our legacy, about the hospital, about everything we've built together. You can't just throw it all away because of some charitable impulse." "Charity?" Arthur repeated, incredulous. "Is that how you see saving a child's life? As charity, an impulse?" "You know very well what I mean. Of course the girl needed medical help, but for you to personally carry her in your arms, take responsibility for her, spend the night here. Arthur, people are speculating. They're saying you're having some kind of midlife crisis, or worse, that you're trying to replace Louise." The mention of their daughter's name hit Arthur like a slap. For a moment he was speechless, just staring at his wife with a mixture of shock and indignation. "Never again," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. "Use our daughter's name to manipulate this situation. What I'm doing has nothing to do with replacing Louise. It has to do with finally honoring her memory the right way." "And how would that be?" By turning our luxury hospital into a charity, by destroying everything we've built. Arthur shook his head, weary. No, Beatrice, what we built was a monument to our own ego, not to Louise's memory. A place where people like Sophia are treated like trash at the front door. Before Beatrice could respond, the door to the room was opened abruptly. It was Dr. Richards, breathless and with an urgent expression on his face. Arthur, we've found Sophia's mother. Instantly, the marital argument was forgotten. Arthur stood up, alert. Where is she? How is she? Paul hesitated, glancing briefly at Beatrice before turning back to his friend. You'd better come with me. There are complications. Leaving Beatrice behind, Arthur followed the doctor to his private office, where a hospital social worker, Frances Gomez, was waiting for them. Her young face was serious, and she held a folder of documents. Mr. Miller, Dr. Richards asked me to investigate Sophia's case. We managed to locate her mother, Janine Sanders, through the records of Miami-Dade County General and the Tuberculosis Treatment Center. And how is she? When can we bring her to see Sophia? Frances exchanged a meaningful look with Paul. Mr. Miller, unfortunately, Mrs. Janine Sanders will not be able to see her daughter. She passed away 3 months ago. A victim of multi-drug-resistant tuberculosis. Sophia probably doesn't know because she was separated from her mother when the illness worsened, for her own protection. The news fell on Arthur like a bomb. He sank into his chair, trying to process what he had just heard. So she's completely alone. Not exactly, Frances continued, consulting her documents. We managed to trace part of her story. Janine was a housekeeper raising Sophia alone. The father is unknown, not listed on the birth certificate. When she became gravely ill, she tried to leave Sophia with a sister who lives on the outskirts of Miami, but the sister-in-law already has 5 children and can barely feed them. Sophia ended up running away and has been living on the streets ever since. And Child Protective Services, social services. Did no one do anything? Arthur asked, his indignation growing. Frances sighed, a sigh that carried all the weight of the broken system she knew so well. The system is overwhelmed, Mr. Miller. There are thousands of children in similar situations. Sophia is just another one who fell through the cracks of the safety net. A heavy silence fell over the office. Arthur stood up, walking to the window. Below, Miami stretched out, a city of brutal contrasts, the skyscrapers of South Beach side by side with communities where children like Sophia fought daily for survival. What are her options now? He finally asked. The standard protocol would be to send her to a shelter as soon as she's discharged, Frances explained. From there, she would get on the waiting list for adoption or a foster family, but the chances aren't good, Mr. Miller. Sophia is already 8 years old, and unfortunately, most families prefer babies or younger children. Also, the history of being on the streets and the traumatic separation from her mother may have left emotional scars that make the process even more difficult. Arthur sat down again, his mind working quickly. Something in Sophia's story touched him deeply, beyond the superficial resemblance to Louise. It was as if fate had placed that girl in his path for a specific reason, a chance for redemption, to do something truly meaningful with all the power and resources he had accumulated over the years. What if I took custody of her? The words came out before he could fully think through their implications. Paul and Frances looked at each other, surprised. Arthur, Paul began cautiously, are you talking about adoption? That's a huge step. Besides, there's Beatrice to consider. An adoption process requires the couple's consensus, psychological evaluations, home visits. I'm not necessarily talking about immediate adoption, Arthur clarified, although the idea had already begun to form in his mind. I'm talking about temporary custody, so she doesn't have to go to a shelter while she recovers her health and processes what happened to her mother. Frances nodded, thoughtful. It's possible. As a prominent businessman with no criminal record, you could apply for temporary custody, especially considering the exceptional circumstances of the case and your direct involvement in saving Sophia, but Beatrice, Arthur completed, understanding what was left unsaid. You think she won't accept? Paul placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. You know your wife better than we do, Arthur. But I can say her reaction yesterday was not welcoming. Before the conversation could continue, the office phone rang. Paul answered, listened briefly, and hung up. "Sophia is awake and asking for you," he informed Arthur. "I'll go see her now. Francis, please prepare the paperwork for temporary custody. As for Beatrice—" Arthur paused, weighing his next words. "I've been living in the shadow of her expectations for too long. It's time to do what I know is right." Upon arriving at the ICU, Arthur found Sophia sitting up in bed, looking much better than the day before. The color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes were brighter and more alert. A nurse had combed her curly hair and replaced the hospital gown with new, colorful pajamas, probably bought from the hospital's own convenience store. "Mr. Arthur," Sophia exclaimed upon seeing him, a smile lighting up her face. "Look what the nurse gave me. It's so soft." Arthur smiled, sitting in the chair, next to the bed. "I see, it suits you. How are you feeling today?" "Better. It only hurts a little when I take a deep breath. The doctor with glasses said it's normal and will go away." Arthur nodded, noticing how observant and articulate Sophia was for a child of her age and circumstances. There was a resilience in her that impressed him. "Sophia, we need to talk about something important," he began cautiously. "It's about your mother." The girl's smile immediately faded, her eyes filling with expectation. "Did you find her? Is she coming to get me?" Arthur took a deep breath, searching for the right words. How do you tell an 8-year-old child that her mother wasn't coming back, that she was alone in the world? "Sophia, we found information about your mother, yes. She was very, very sick, you remember?" The girl nodded, serious. "She coughed a lot every day. Sometimes there was blood." "That's right. Your mother had a disease called tuberculosis, which attacks the lungs. The doctors did everything they could to help her, but—" Arthur paused, seeing Sophia's eyes fill with tears. She already knew, he realized. Somehow she had already understood. "She's not coming back, is she?" The girl's voice was almost a whisper. "No, sweetie, your mother passed away 3 months ago." "I'm so sorry." Sophia didn't cry as he had expected. Instead, she nodded slowly, as if confirming something she had long suspected. "I think I already knew. I just didn't want to believe it." Arthur felt his heart ache. This child had faced more loss and hardship in her 8 years of life than many adults would ever face. And yet, she maintained a dignity and strength that moved him deeply. "Sophia, do you know what happens now without your mother?" She shrugged, trying to look strong, but her lower lip trembled. "I'll go back to the street, right? Or to one of those places full of kids who don't have families. What if I told you there's another option?" Sophia looked at him, curious. "What do you mean? What if you came to live with me? Temporarily, while we decide what's best for you?" The girl's eyes widened. "In your big house? With your angry wife?" Arthur couldn't help but smile at the childish frankness. "Yes, in my big house. As for my wife, well, she'll have to get used to the idea." Sophia studied him for a long moment, as if trying to gauge the sincerity of the offer. "Why do you want to do this? You don't even know me." The question caught Arthur by surprise. It was an adult, mature question, revealing how life on the streets had taught Sophia to be wary of offers that seemed too good to be true. "Because I believe I found you for a reason, Sophia. Because I think we can help each other. I lost my daughter Louise a few years ago. Since then, I've been living, as if a part of me were asleep. Seeing you, taking care of you, I feel that part waking up again." He paused, realizing he was being more honest with this child he had just met than he had been with himself for years. "Besides," he continued, "you deserve a chance to go to school, to have a home, to be a child." Sophia absorbed his words in silence. Finally, with the wisdom of someone who had seen enough of life not to trust easily, she asked, "What if it doesn't work out? What if your wife doesn't like me? Then we'll find another solution, but you have my word that you will not go back to the streets, not as long as I'm alive." In that moment, something seemed to resolve in Sophia's gaze. A decision was made, a trust placed. "Okay, Mr. Arthur, I'll go." Outside the ICU, Beatrice watched the scene through the glass, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. Beside her, Oliver muttered concerns about the impact of this charity case on the hospital's image, on the stock value, on investor confidence. But Beatrice barely heard him. Her mind was elsewhere, remembering moments she had long tried to bury. The birth of Louise, the dreams she and Arthur had shared in the beginning, the hospital they had planned to build as a beacon of excellence and humanity in American healthcare. At what point had they lost their way? At what point had the dream turned into a cold money-making machine, where children like Sophia were seen as inconveniences? As she watched her husband gently hold the hand of that street girl, Beatrice felt something break inside her. She didn't know if it was anger, jealousy, shame, or a mixture of all these feelings. She only knew that nothing would ever be the same in the carefully controlled universe she had built for herself. And, paradoxically, a small part of her, a part she had suppressed for years, felt an inexplicable relief at that. Chapter 4. Transformations. The Miller Mansion in the Coral Gables neighborhood was a monument to opulence. With its 3 stories, lush gardens, Olympic-sized swimming pool, and a team of staff that included gardeners, cooks, housekeepers, and even a private driver, it represented everything money could buy in terms of comfort and status in Miami. It was to this modern palace that Sophia was taken a week after her surgery. Dr. Richards had authorized her discharge on the condition that she have constant supervision and a special diet to regain the weight and nutrients lost during her months on the streets. The arrival at the mansion was a moment of stark contrasts. Arthur's car, a top-of-the-line BMW, entered through the automatic gates as Sophia looked out the window, agape at the size of the property. Dressed in new clothes bought especially for her, the girl still seemed out of place in that environment, like a small intruder in a world that was clearly not hers. "We're here," Arthur announced, trying to sound casual as he watched the girl's reaction. "What do you think?" Sophia took a moment to answer, her eyes scanning the impeccable gardens, the ornamental fountain, the imposing facade of the house. "It's bigger than the hospital," was all she could say. Arthur smiled, helping her out of the car. Sophia was still weak, moving carefully because of the surgical stitches. One hand tightly gripped a new doll, a gift from a nurse at the hospital, as if it were her only real possession in this unfamiliar world. At the mansion's door, Mrs. Eleanor, the housekeeper, was waiting for them. She was a middle-aged black woman with a kind face and eyes that had witnessed all the dramas of the Miller family over the years. "Welcome, Miss Sophia," she said with a genuine smile. "We've prepared a special room for you." Sophia looked at the housekeeper with a mixture of shyness and relief. There was something in Mrs. Eleanor's face that inspired trust, a welcome contrast to the coldness she had felt from Beatrice at the hospital. "Thank you," Sophia murmured, clutching the doll even tighter. Arthur noticed the immediate connection between the two and felt grateful for it. He knew Sophia would need allies in this house, especially considering Beatrice's reaction to the decision to bring her to live with them. The argument had been intense. Beatrice initially had flatly refused to accept the idea. "Our home is not an orphanage, Arthur," she had shouted, throwing a crystal glass against the wall in a rare moment of lost control. "Have you completely lost your mind? What will our friends think? How will I explain this at the club, at social gatherings?" But Arthur, for the first time in years, stood firm. It wasn't just about Sophia, he explained. It was about recovering something they had lost. Not just Louise, but purpose, humanity, the values they had sworn never to forget. In the end, after hours of discussion, Beatrice had given in, not out of agreement, but out of exhaustion and the realization that her husband would not back down. "Do as you wish," she finally said, with calculated coldness, "but don't expect me to play adoptive mother to a street girl. This is your project, not mine." Now, as they entered the mansion, Arthur wondered if he had made the right decision. Not. For himself, he was more convinced than ever that Sophia was the chance for redemption he didn't know he was looking for. But for the girl, was it fair to bring her into an environment where one of the central figures openly rejected her? His thoughts were interrupted when he saw Beatrice descending the stairs. Impeccably dressed, as always, she seemed to have prepared especially for this moment, as if it were a business meeting and not the arrival of a child to the house. "Ah, you've arrived," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze swept over, Sophia from head to toe, appraising her. "Welcome, Sophia. I hope you feel comfortable in our home." Sophia, sensing the tension in the air, instinctively pressed against Arthur. "Thank you, Mum," she replied in a low voice. "Beatrice," the woman corrected quickly. "You can call me Beatrice. Mum makes me feel old." "Shall we show you your room, Sophia?" Arthur suggested, trying to diffuse the tension. "Mrs. Eleanor and I picked everything out especially for you." Leaving Beatrice behind, they climbed the stairs to the second floor. The mansion was a labyrinth of hallways and doors, all decorated with understated but undeniable luxury. For Sophia, who had slept on sidewalks and under awnings for the past few months, it was like stepping into a fairy tale, fascinating and intimidating at the same time. The room prepared for her was near Arthur's office. It was spacious, with a canopy single bed, a desk, a bookshelf, and a walk-in closet that seemed larger than many entire apartments. The walls had been painted a soft yellow, and there were prints of flowers and butterflies everywhere. It was her room, wasn't it?" Sophia asked, with a perceptiveness that surprised Arthur. "Your daughter who went away?" Arthur swallowed hard, feeling the familiar lump in his throat that appeared whenever he thought of Louise. "No, Sophia. Louise's room is at the end of the hall. This was one of the guest rooms. We redecorated it especially for you." Sophia walked slowly around the space, touching the furniture as if she couldn't believe it was real. "I've never had a room all to myself before," she confessed. "At my old house I slept in the living room with my mum." The simplicity of the statement hit Arthur like a punch. It was easy to forget amidst the luxury that surrounded him daily, that basic things like one's own room were inaccessible luxuries for a large part of the population. "Well, now you have one," he said, trying to sound cheerful. "And there's more. Tomorrow, we're going to the mall to buy everything you need. New clothes, school supplies, toys." "School?" Sophia asked, her eyes widening. "I'm going to school." "Of course you are. Every child should go to school. Have you studied before?" Sophia nodded. "I studied until last year before my mum got really sick. I liked math." Arthur smiled, genuinely impressed. "Then we'll find the best school for you to keep learning math. What do you think?" For the first time since he had met her, Arthur saw a truly radiant smile on Sophia's face. "I would like that very much, Mr. Arthur." The following weeks were a period of adjustment for everyone in the Miller mansion. Sophia gradually adapted to the new routine, regular medical checkups, a special diet prepared by the cook under a nutritionist's guidance, and private tutoring to prepare her for entering a regular school next semester. For Arthur, it was a period of rediscovery. He started coming home from work earlier, eager to hear about Sophia's day. He cut back on business trips and began delegating more responsibilities, prioritizing time with the girl. Together they explored the garden, read books, and watched movies that Arthur hadn't seen since Louise was alive. Mrs. Eleanor became Sophia's confidant. It was with her that the girl felt comfortable talking about her memories of her mother, about the months on the streets, about the fears and hopes she carried. The housekeeper, who had lost her own daughter to urban violence years before, saw in Sophia a second chance to exercise the maternal love that still overflowed in her heart. Beatrice, however, remained distant. She participated in meals, asked polite questions about Sophia's school progress, but there was an invisible barrier between her and the girl, a wall of mistrust and resentment that no one knew how to break down. One afternoon, about a month after Sophia's arrival, Arthur was called urgently to the hospital. An important patient, a senator campaigning for re-election, had suffered a heart attack and demanded the presence of the hospital owner to ensure the best care. "I'll be back soon," he promised Sophia, who was in the pool, learning to swim, with Mrs. Eleanor's help. "Be good and listen to Mrs. Eleanor, okay?" Sophia nodded seriously as she always did when given instructions. In her short life, she had learned that following rules was often the difference between surviving and not. What no one expected was that on that same afternoon, Beatrice would also receive an unexpected call. Her friend Christina, wife of the mayor of Miami and one of the biggest gossips in the local high society, invited her to a last-minute charity tea. The real reason, as Beatrice well knew, was curiosity about the adopted girl, as Sophia was being called in social circles, even though there was no formal adoption process yet. "I can't leave the girl alone," Beatrice explained, looking for an excuse to avoid what would surely be a veiled interrogation. "Oh, bring her," Christina insisted with false excitement. "We're all dying to meet the little one who captured the heart of the powerful Arthur Miller. Besides, it will be an opportunity for her to socialize with children of good standing. My niece Isabella will be there, and you know how adorable she is with younger children." Backed into a corner, Beatrice gave in. Part of her knew it was a bad idea, but another part, the one that still cared desperately about her social position, couldn't refuse. Besides, she thought, maybe it would be good for Sophia to see how civilized people behaved in society. "Sophia," she called, walking to the pool, "get out of the water and get ready. We're going out." The girl looked at Mrs. Eleanor, confused. The housekeeper shrugged, as surprised as she was. "Where are we going, ma'am? I mean, Beatrice." "A charity tea, with important people. I want you to wear that blue dress we bought last week and let Mrs. Eleanor do your hair, and remember, behave yourself. These people are very influential in the city." Sophia obeyed, feeling a knot in her stomach that had nothing to do with the pool water. In her experience, important people rarely meant anything good for people like her. The charity tea was held in the garden of the Albuquerque mansion, a property even more ostentatious than the Millers'. Tables decorated with expensive floral arrangements were scattered across the perfectly manicured lawn, and uniformed waiters served champagne, imported teas, and petit fours on silver platters. When Beatrice and Sophia arrived, all conversations momentarily ceased, all eyes turning to them, or more specifically, to the small, curly-haired, brown-skinned girl who stood out completely in the predominantly white and elitist environment. "Beatrice, darling," exclaimed Christina Albuquerque, hurrying to greet them. "And this must be Sophia, how adorable. Come, dear, the children are playing in the gazebo. Isabella will love to meet you." Sophia shot a pleading look at Beatrice, clearly not wanting to be separated from her, despite all the coldness the woman showed. But Beatrice just nodded, encouraging her to follow Christina. "Go on, Sophia. Behave and have fun with the other children. I'll be here, with the ladies." As soon as Sophia walked away, Beatrice was surrounded by her friends, women from Miami's high society who could barely hide their morbid curiosity about the new addition to the Miller family. "So it's true," whispered Amanda Caldwell, wife of a major real estate developer. "Arthur really brought a street girl to live with you. What admirable charity." "How is the adjustment going?" asked another, with false concern. "It must be so hard for her to get used to rules, to basic hygiene. Are you planning to formalize the adoption, or is it just temporary custody?" The questions continued, increasingly invasive, increasingly less disguised in their cruelty. Beatrice answered automatically, as if on autopilot, feeling strangely disconnected from the conversation. One part of her, a part she no longer recognized, played the social game, giving the expected answers, laughing at the right moments. Another part, however, began to see these women in a new light, noticing the superficiality, the pettiness that permeated the circle she had once considered so important. Meanwhile, in the gazebo, Sophia was facing her own social hell. Isabella, Christina's niece, a 10-year-old girl with perfectly styled blonde hair and a dress that probably cost more than 6 months' rent in the slum where Sophia was born, led a group of privileged children who looked at the newcomer with poorly concealed disdain. "Is it true you used to live on the street?" Isabella asked bluntly, as the other children formed a circle around Sophia. "Mommy said you ate out of the trash." Sophia felt her face burn. She wanted to disappear, to run back to Beatrice, or better yet, to Mrs. Eleanor, to Arthur, anywhere away from those looks of pity and disgust. "I didn't eat trash," she replied, trying to maintain her dignity. "Sometimes I took food that restaurants threw away, but it was still good." Her honest answer provoked shocked giggles among the children. "You!" exclaimed a boy of about 9. "That's disgusting." "How did you get Uncle Arthur to take you to his house?" Isabella continued, relentless in her childish cruelty. "Mommy said you must have looked so pathetic, all dirty and sick." Sophia felt tears forming. but she refused to cry. In the months she had spent on the streets, she had learned that showing weakness only attracted more trouble. "I didn't do anything," she replied, her voice firm despite the lump in her throat. "I was sick and your uncle helped me because he's a good person." "Or because you look like Cousin Louise," commented another older girl, with the cruel frankness typical of pre-adolescence. "Everyone knows Uncle Arthur never got over what happened to her." Sophia didn't know what to say to that. She had noticed how Arthur sometimes looked at her in a distant way, as if he were seeing someone else. She knew of Louise's existence, of course, but no one in the house spoke openly about what had happened to her, only that she had passed away a few years ago. "You shouldn't be here," Isabella concluded, giving voice to the collective thought of that small group representing the next generation of Miami's elite. "You're not like us." It was at that moment, when Sophia was on the verge of tears, that an adult voice interrupted the conversation. "What's going on here?" It was Beatrice who had approached without the children noticing. Her face, normally composed, showed an expression Sophia had never seen before, a mixture of anger and protection. "Nothing, Aunt Beatrice," Isabella replied quickly with an angelic smile. "We were just getting to know Sophia better." Beatrice looked from the blonde girl to Sophia, whose eyes were shining with unshed tears, and whose rigid posture clearly indicated that something was very wrong. "Sophia," she said, extending her hand to the girl, "come with me. I just remembered we have another appointment." Sophia took the offered hand with surprise and relief, letting herself be led away from the gazebo, away from the stares and comments of those children who could never understand her reality. In the car, as the driver took them back home, a heavy silence settled between them. Sophia looked out the window, trying not to think about what had just happened, trying not to wonder if she really was just a replacement for Arthur's lost daughter. It was Beatrice who finally broke the silence. "They were cruel to you." It wasn't a question, but a statement. Sophia just nodded, without turning. "What did they say?" Sophia hesitated. She didn't want to cause trouble, didn't want to seem like she was complaining. "Nothing much." "Sophia," Beatrice's voice was surprisingly gentle, "don't lie to me. I saw your face. What did those girls say?" Slowly, reluctantly, Sophia told her. About the questions about eating from the trash, about being pathetic, about not belonging in that world, and finally about Louise. "They said, I'm only with you because I look like her, like your daughter who's gone." Beatrice took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for something difficult. "Sophia, look at me." The girl turned, meeting Beatrice's eyes, the same eyes that until then had only shown coldness and suspicion towards her. "What happened to Louise is a story we will tell you one day, but what I can say now is that no one, absolutely no one, can replace her, nor should they. Every person is unique." Sophia nodded, still unsure of where Beatrice was going with this. "But that doesn't mean," Beatrice continued, choosing her words carefully, "that there can't be room in our hearts for someone else. For you." The admission, so simple yet so significant, took Sophia by surprise. It was the first time Beatrice had shown any sign of acceptance, any indication that Sophia could be more than an imposition, more than Arthur's charity project. "I know I haven't been welcoming," Beatrice continued, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. "I have my reasons, which have nothing to do with you, and one day I will explain them too. But what I saw today, the way those children treated you, how my own friends talked about you behind your back." She shook her head with evident disgust. "It made me realize that I have become exactly the kind of person I despised when I was young." Sophia didn't know what to say. She was still processing the fact that Beatrice, the cold and distant Beatrice, was opening up to her, speaking as if she were capable of understanding complex adult issues. "I don't know if I'll ever be to you what Arthur is becoming," Beatrice confessed. "I don't know if I'll be able to be a mother, but I promise to try to be better than I have been so far, and I promise never to expose you to people like that again." When they arrived home, Mrs. Eleanor was waiting at the door, worried about their early return. Beatrice, to the housekeeper's amazement, held Sophia's hand as she got out of the car and led her to the door, as a mother would with her daughter, not as a society lady with a charity case. "Mrs. Eleanor," Beatrice said with a new determination in her voice, "Sophia has had a difficult day. Please prepare a hot chocolate for her and take it to her room. And then, if it's not too much to ask, could you meet me in my office? We have some changes to plan." As Sophia climbed the stairs, feeling strangely lighter despite the terrible day, Beatrice watched her, a thoughtful expression on her face. Something had changed that afternoon, not just in how she saw Sophia, but in how she saw herself, her marriage to Arthur, the world they had built around themselves. Upstairs, Sophia entered her room and walked to the window, looking out at the impeccable garden below. She thought of her mother, of how happy she would be to know that her daughter was safe, with a roof over her head, food on the table, a chance to go to school. "Maybe I can belong here after all," she murmured to herself, as the sun began to set on the Miami horizon, casting a golden glow over the Miller mansion, a house that was slowly beginning to transform into a home. What Sophia didn't know, what no one in the mansion could predict, was that the changes were just beginning, and that St. Christopher's Hospital, under the renewed influence of its owner, was about to become the epicenter of a quiet revolution that would affect the entire city. Chapter 5. Confrontations. St. Christopher's Hospital was buzzing with activity that Monday morning. Doctors, nurses, and administrative staff moved hastily through the corridors, exchanging apprehensive glances and whispering among themselves. The reason for the commotion: an extraordinary board meeting called by Arthur Miller with just 24 hours' notice. In the spacious auditorium on the top floor, with a panoramic view of the South Beach waterfront, 12 people waited tensely. The directors of each hospital department, representatives of the main shareholders, and, to everyone's surprise, Beatrice Miller, who rarely participated in administrative matters, even though she was officially vice president of the board. When Arthur finally entered, accompanied by Dr. Richards and the social worker Francis Gomez, the buzz immediately ceased. Everyone knew that determined expression on the businessman's face. It was the same one that had preceded major changes in the past, some profitable, others controversial. "Good morning, everyone," he began, dispensing with pleasantries. "I appreciate each of you being here, especially on such short notice. This meeting will be brief, but crucial for the future of St. Christopher's." Oliver Myers, the administrative director, nervously adjusted his glasses. Since the incident with Sophia 2 months earlier, he had felt his job was on the line. Arthur had become increasingly critical of the hospital's exclusivist management, questioning protocols he had previously approved without hesitation. "As you all know," Arthur continued, "our hospital has positioned itself in the market as a premium institution, aimed at high-income patients and top-tier insurance plans. This strategy has brought us undeniable financial success. We are the most profitable hospital in the Southeast for the fifth consecutive year." Murmurs of approval rippled through the room. Several directors smiled, pleased with the mention of the success they had all helped build. "However," Arthur's voice hardened, "this success has come at a cost that doesn't appear on the financial statements. A human cost." The smiles on their faces began to fade, replaced by confused or apprehensive expressions. 2 months ago, a child was on the verge of death at our hospital's door because our policy did not allow treatment for patients without health insurance or the ability to pay. That child is now under my care, and her recovery has made me reflect deeply on the kind of institution we have built. Arthur paused, looking directly at each person in the room. St. Christopher's was founded after the passing of my daughter Louise. At that time, Beatrice and I had a dream: to create a hospital where no family would go through what we went through, the helplessness of not being able to save someone we love despite all available resources. Beatrice, sitting in the front row, nodded slightly. It was rare to hear Arthur speak so openly about Louise, especially in a professional setting. But somewhere along the way, he continued, that dream became distorted. We turned what should have been a sanctuary of healing into an exclusive club, where the value of life is measured by the ability to pay, where receptionists feel entitled to deny care to a child with advanced appendicitis because she is dirty and barefoot. Oliver cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Arthur, if I may, that situation was regrettable, but isolated. We have already reviewed the triage protocols and— It was not isolated, interrupted Francis Gomez, the social worker, stepping forward with a folder of documents. In the last 6 months, we have documented 27 cases of patients turned away at the reception of St. Christopher's for financial reasons, even in emergency situations. Of these, 14 were children. The revelation fell like a bombshell in the room. Some directors seemed genuinely shocked, others looked away, aware of the reality they preferred to ignore. "How is that possible?" asked a shareholder, an elderly woman who rarely spoke at meetings. "I thought our protocol dictated that emergencies were always to be treated, regardless of ability to pay." "On paper, yes," replied Dr. Richards. "In practice, a culture of filtering patients at reception has developed. Before, they can even be classified as emergencies. It's an unofficial but systematic practice." Arthur resumed speaking, "And that is why we are here today, to announce fundamental changes in the policy and culture of St. Christopher's Hospital." With a gesture, he signaled for an assistant to distribute folders containing documents to everyone present. As the directors leafed through the contents, expressions of astonishment, concern, and, in some cases, indignation appeared on their faces. This is a complete restructuring," exclaimed Oliver, visibly paling. "You're proposing to allocate 30% of our beds for free care? To create an entire pediatric wing for children without resources? This will cut our profits in half." "By a third, to be precise," Arthur corrected calmly. "We will still be profitable, just not obscenely profitable as we have been until now." "The shareholders will never approve this," stated another director, shaking his head emphatically. "We have responsibilities to investors, targets to meet." "The shareholders have already approved," intervened Beatrice, standing up to be by her husband's side. The move surprised everyone, including Arthur himself, or at least the majority shareholders have. "Arthur and I control 62% of the shares of St. Christopher's. If we add Dr. Richards, we reach 67%. The decision is made." Beatrice's declaration caused a stunned silence. Everyone knew she was a force to be reckoned with in Miami's social circles, but her active participation in business had always been minimal. To see her now, firmly positioned beside her husband in such a radical change, was nothing short of shocking. But this is madness," Oliver finally exploded. "You're going to turn the most exclusive hospital in the Southeast into a charity ward. All the years of work to build our reputation, our premium positioning—" "Our reputation," Arthur interrupted, his voice dangerously calm, "should be based on the excellence of our care and our ability to save lives, not on how much we charge for it. And as for premium positioning, Oliver, let me be clear. The real luxury is being able to help those in need, not excluding those who cannot pay." The discussion heated up. For nearly 2 hours, arguments were exchanged, numbers were analyzed, forecasts were presented. Some directors, impressed with the detailed plan Arthur and his team had developed, began to show more receptiveness. Others, led by Oliver, remained adamant in their opposition. "If this goes forward," Oliver finally threatened, "I will be forced to resign." A tense silence followed the statement. Oliver was considered a key player in the hospital's administration, the main person responsible for the institution's financial health in recent years. "I'm sorry to hear that," Arthur replied without hesitation. "Your contribution has been valuable, and the door will always be open if you change your mind. But the changes will happen, with or without you." As the meeting drew to a close, with practical details being discussed and deadlines set, no one noticed the man observing discreetly from the back of the room. Charles Chad Matthews was a reporter for the Miami Herald, the most influential newspaper in the region. Invited by Francis, with Arthur's permission, he was taking frantic notes, already envisioning the headline that would shake the city the next day. On the way back home, in the back seat of the BMW, Arthur and Beatrice remained silent for several minutes. Finally, he took his wife's hand in his. "Thank you for supporting me back there. I didn't expect—" You didn't expect me to agree with a decision that will significantly cut our income, she completed, with an ironic smile. Neither, did I? But something has changed, Arthur. In me. Since that day at the charity tea with Sophia. Beatrice paused, organizing her thoughts. I saw my reflection in the eyes of those women, those children, and I didn't like what I saw. It wasn't who I wanted to be, not who I planned to become when we met, remember? I was the idealistic doctor who wanted to change the healthcare system from the inside. Arthur nodded, squeezing her hand tighter. He remembered the young Beatrice well, newly graduated, full of plans to democratize access to quality healthcare. Like himself, she had lost her way, seduced by the comfort, the status, the power that money provided. And now? He asked. Now I'm trying to find that Beatrice again, and I think Sophia has been my guide on this journey, even though she doesn't know it. When they arrived at the mansion, they were greeted by an excited Sophia, still wearing the uniform of the private school where she had started studying the week before. Her curly hair, once disheveled, now formed well-defined curls that framed an increasingly healthy and happy face. "How was the meeting?" she asked bluntly. "Did you manage?" "To change the hospital," Arthur smiled, surprised by the girl's interest. "We're starting, Sophia. It will be a long process, but we took the first step today." "And will poor children be able to come in now, even without money?" "Yes," confirmed Beatrice, to Arthur's astonishment. "Especially the children. No child will be turned away from St. Christopher's again, no matter where they come from or how much money they have." Sophia clapped her hands, genuinely happy with the news. Mrs. Eleanor said she would pray for it to work out. She lit a candle and everything. Arthur and Beatrice exchanged a knowing look, touched by the simplicity with which Sophia viewed the change, not as a complex corporate restructuring, but as a matter of simple justice. That night, while Sophia slept, Arthur received a call from Dr. Richards. The doctor seemed agitated, which was unusual for his normally calm temperament. "Arthur, have you seen the online edition of the Miami Herald? Chad has already published the article about the changes at the hospital." "So soon? I thought it would only be out tomorrow in the print version." "Well, apparently the story was too hot to wait, and he went beyond what we discussed in the meeting. He did a full investigative piece, interviewed former patients who were turned away, got statements from ex-employees about the filtering practices at reception. It's quite an exposé." Arthur immediately accessed the newspaper's website on his tablet. The headline jumped off the screen: "Exclusive, the dark side of the Southeast's most luxurious hospital." As he read the article, his stomach sank. Chad had done a meticulous job, exposing not only recent practices, but tracing a history of social exclusion that went back to the hospital's very founding. There were anonymous testimonies from doctors and nurses, reporting how they were instructed to prioritize more profitable patients. There were documented cases of people who had suffered serious consequences or even died because they were refused or received delayed care at St. Christopher's. And there was a particularly painful passage detailing how the hospital had been founded after Arthur and Beatrice's personal tragedy, but had ended up straying from its original values, becoming a monument to inequality in one of America's most unequal cities. "Paul, this is devastating." "I know, but maybe it's necessary, Arthur. The truth, however painful, is the first step towards real change." After hanging up, Arthur stayed awake for hours, rereading the article, absorbing the implications of what was to come. He knew the next day would be tumultuous. There would be reactions from all sides, from the press, patients, investors, and Miami society as a whole. And indeed, when the sun rose the next morning, the storm was already brewing. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Messages flooded his cell. The press gathered at the hospital gates and even at the entrance to the mansion. But it was a call from an unknown number that really caught his attention. "Mr. Miller, this is Jessica Alvarez from the City Health Department. The commissioner would like to schedule an urgent meeting with you. We have a proposal that might interest you, considering the new guidelines at St. Christopher's." The meeting was set for late that afternoon. Arthur decided to take Beatrice with him, not just for moral support, but because her medical experience would be valuable in evaluating the proposal, whatever it was. The office of Miami's health commissioner was in the city's administrative center, a complex of modern buildings that contrasted with the historic surroundings. Richard Fuentes, the commissioner, was a man in his 50s, with graying hair and a reputation as a competent administrator, though often limited by a lack of resources. "Arthur, Beatrice, thank you for coming so quickly," he greeted them, indicating the chairs in front of his desk. "The Miami Herald article landed like a bombshell on the city. I confess I was surprised, pleasantly surprised by your initiative." "Thank you, Richard," Arthur replied cautiously. He knew the commissioner from social events, but they had never had a close relationship. "You mentioned a proposal." Richard settled into his chair, excited. "Yes, and I believe it has come at the perfect time. You see, the city has been facing a public health crisis, as you surely know, especially in pediatric care. Our hospitals are overwhelmed. We lack beds, equipment, even qualified staff." Beatrice nodded, well aware of the reality of the city's public hospitals. "Recently," the commissioner continued, "we received significant federal funding to improve pediatric care. The problem is, building a new hospital or renovating existing ones would take years, time that many children don't have." "And that's where we come in," Arthur deduced. "Exactly. With the changes you've announced, St. Christopher's becomes an ideal partner. I propose a partnership between the city and the hospital, where we would direct part of this funding to you in exchange for guaranteed care for children on public assistance, especially complex cases that our hospitals are not equipped to handle." The proposal was tempting. Not only did it accelerate the hospital's transformation plan, but it also guaranteed a steady stream of resources that would offset some of the financial losses from the new policy. "What would be the patient volume?" Beatrice asked, always practical. "And what kind of cases would we be talking about?" "Initially, we're thinking of about 50 beds exclusively for the partnership, as for the cases, they would be mainly complex surgeries, cancer treatments, and patients requiring specialized pediatric ICU care." The technical discussion lasted for nearly 2 hours. In the end, a preliminary agreement was reached, with details to be finalized in the following weeks. As they left the administrative building, Arthur and Beatrice were once again approached by the press. This time, however, instead of fleeing the cameras as he had in the morning, Arthur decided to speak. "Yes, it's true that St. Christopher's Hospital is undergoing a fundamental transformation," he confirmed to the swarming reporters. "And yes, we have just reached a preliminary agreement with the health department to treat children on public assistance. But this is just the beginning." "Mr. Miller," a reporter shouted, "is it true that this change was inspired by a street girl you took in?" The question caught Arthur by surprise. He hadn't expected Sophia to be mentioned so directly. He felt Beatrice squeeze his hand, a silent gesture of support. "Sophia is not a street girl," he replied firmly. "Sophia is a brilliant child who is temporarily under our care while her legal status is being determined. And yes, she was a catalyst for much reflection. But the truth is, this transformation was long overdue. St. Christopher's was founded on values we lost sight of along the way. We are simply returning to our roots." As the questions continued, Beatrice watched her husband with a new look of admiration. This was not the pragmatic, calculating Arthur of recent years. This was the man she had fallen in love with decades ago, idealistic, brave, willing to challenge the status quo for what he believed in. What neither of them could foresee as they answered the journalists' questions that afternoon was that their example would begin to inspire change far beyond the walls of St. Christopher's. In the days and weeks to come, other private hospitals in the region would start to question their own policies. Doctors and nurses, encouraged by the public example, would begin to report similar practices in other institutions. And in a small room at the back of the Matthews mansion, the powerful family that controlled the largest rival hospital network to St. Christopher's, a plan was beginning to be hatched. A plan to ensure that Arthur Miller's philanthropic madness did not spread, and if possible to take advantage of the competitor's apparent weakness to eliminate him from the market for good. The stage was set for a battle that would go far beyond business, touching on fundamental questions about health, dignity, and the very social fabric of Miami. A battle that, without anyone yet realizing it, had at its epicenter a small curly-haired girl whose arrival had triggered a quiet revolution. Meanwhile, in her room at the Miller mansion, Sophia was doing something she hadn't done in a long time, praying. Not for herself, but for all the children like her, who would now have a chance she almost didn't get. A chance to be cared for, to be seen, to be treated as human beings worthy of care, regardless of the money their families had or didn't have. "Thank you, Mommy," she whispered, to the worn-out photo of Janine she kept under her pillow, "for teaching me to never lose hope. I think I've found good people, like you always said existed." Chapter 6. Revelations. The Matthews Mansion was located in the Pinecrest neighborhood, an upscale area of Miami known for its preserved colonial-style homes and almost bucolic tranquility, despite being within the city. It was an imposing property, built in the early 20th century by a sugar baron and meticulously maintained by the family that had bought it in the 1970s. That Thursday afternoon, 5 men were gathered in the mansion's library, a room with a high ceiling, walls lined with old books, and dark wood furniture that seemed to weigh tons. The air conditioning was working at full blast, fighting not only the Miami heat, but also the tension that warmed the room. At the head of the meeting table sat Raoul Matthews, patriarch of the family and CEO of the Florida Health Group, which controlled the Vita Hospital network, St. Christopher's main competitor. At 65, Raoul maintained the upright posture and piercing gaze that intimidated employees, partners, and even his own sons. "So that's it?" he asked, after hearing the detailed report on the changes at St. Christopher's. "Arthur Miller has really lost his mind, or he's finally shown his true colors, a socialist disguised as a businessman." Henry Matthews, his eldest son and the group's chief financial officer, adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable with his father's tone. "Socialist or not, Dad, the fact is his move is making waves. The press hasn't talked about anything else for 2 weeks. Social media is in an uproar. Even the mayor got involved, signing that multi-million-dollar partnership. It's a brilliant marketing move," commented the third man at the table, Carl Daniels, marketing director for the Vita network. "We have to admit it. In 2 weeks, St. Christopher's went from luxury hospital with questionable practices to revolutionary and humanitarian institution." Raoul slammed his hand on the table, impatient. "Marketing? You think that's what this is about? Arthur is attacking the foundations of our business. If this idea catches on, if other hospitals follow his example, do you know what happens? Pressure from everywhere. Governments, NGOs, the media, all pointing to St. Christopher's as the model to follow and to us as the greedy villains." The fourth man, silent until now, finally spoke up. Dr. Emmanuel Santana was the medical director of the Vita network, and the oldest in the group, having recently turned 70. His wrinkled face carried the wisdom of decades in medicine, and his gaze, unlike Raoul's, conveyed more weariness than authority. "Perhaps," he hesitated, aware of the dangerous ground he was treading. "Perhaps Arthur is right. Not completely, of course. We can't turn private hospitals into philanthropic institutions overnight, but the idea of setting aside a percentage of beds for social cases, especially children, it wouldn't be that revolutionary. Several hospitals in the Northeast and on the West Coast already do it." The ensuing silence was broken by Raoul's dry laugh. "Emmanuel, my old friend, you're getting soft in your old age, or maybe you're ready for retirement if you're starting to think like Arthur." The doctor held the businessman's gaze without backing down. "Or maybe I'm just tired of seeing children turned away from our emergency rooms because their parents don't have health insurance. Maybe I'm tired of lying to myself that it's just business." The tension between the two men was palpable. Henry tried to intervene, returning to the practical issue. "Regardless of who is morally right or wrong, we need a strategy. St. Christopher's is gaining ground quickly. The partnership with the city will provide them with considerable resources, offsetting some of the financial losses they would have with the new policy." "And their stock?" Raoul asked. "Has it started to fall?" Surprisingly, no, Henry replied, consulting his tablet. There was an initial 8% drop when the news leaked, but it has stabilized since then. In fact, it started to rise again yesterday. Impossible! Raoul slammed the table again, harder this time. Who in their right mind would invest in a hospital that just cut its profitability for a philanthropic whim? Social impact investors, suggested Carl. It's a growing trend. Companies that combine profit with a social purpose are attracting a new profile of investor. And there's the publicity factor. St. Christopher's has never had so much positive media exposure. The fifth man, who had only been observing until then, finally spoke. He was the youngest in the group, no older than 35, but his impeccable suit and confident posture indicated he wasn't there by chance. Flavio Torres was the newest director at the Vita network, responsible for competitive intelligence, a euphemism for corporate espionage. There's something else you need to know about this whole story, he said with an enigmatic smile. Something I've researched thoroughly and that completely changes the game. What are you talking about, Flavio? Raoul asked impatiently. About the girl, Sophia, the supposed street child that Arthur and Beatrice took in and who supposedly inspired this whole transformation at St. Christopher's. What about her? Flavio opened a folder he had brought with him and spread some photos and documents on the table. Sophia Sanders, 8 years old. Mother Janine Sanders, deceased 3 months ago, victim of multi-drug-resistant tuberculosis. Father, unknown, not listed on the birth certificate. So what? We already knew that. It's in all the papers. Yes, but what's not in the papers? Flavio paused dramatically. Is that Janine Sanders worked at the Miller house for almost a year, when Sophia was just a baby. The revelation had the desired effect. Everyone present leaned over the table, suddenly interested. What do you mean? Henry asked. She was their employee? Exactly. Janine was hired as an assistant nanny for Louise, the Miller's biological daughter, who was about 5 years old at the time. She brought Sophia, who was a newborn, to live with her in the maids' quarters. And how did you find this out? Questioned Dr. Santana, skeptical. I spoke with former employees of the mansion. It wasn't difficult. Many still resent the couple, especially Beatrice, who was always known for being demanding with the staff. This changes everything, Raoul muttered, a new glint in his eyes. It's not a random charity story. There's a prior connection, a moral responsibility perhaps. They're not taking in a stranger. They're making amends for something. Exactly, Flavio agreed. And there's more. Janine didn't just leave the job. She was fired by Beatrice under circumstances that were never clarified. Some say there was a heated argument, others that she was accused of theft. The fact is she left abruptly, and coincidence or not, that's when her situation began to deteriorate. Dr. Santana frowned. How many years ago was this? About 7. Sophia was still a baby, barely a year old. And what do you intend to do with this information? The doctor asked, already anticipating the answer. Raoul smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The right question, Emmanuel, is what the press will do with this information. This whole hospital with a heart story loses some of its shine when we find out it's not about spontaneous charity, but about compensating for past mistakes. Or worse, Flavio added, they could be using Sophia as a marketing piece, exploiting the very employee they mistreated years ago. Dr. Santana stood up, his face red with indignation. This is too low even for you, Raoul. Using a child, exposing her past, her personal tragedy, just to hit a competitor? Business is business, my friend, and Arthur started this war when he decided he could redesign the rules of the market. So that's it? We're going to dig through the Miller's past garbage to discredit an initiative that, whether you like it or not, will benefit hundreds of sick children. Raoul also stood up, facing the old doctor. Emmanuel, maybe you should really consider retirement. You clearly no longer have the stomach for the real world. The two men stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Dr. Santana picked up his briefcase, straightened his jacket, and walked towards the door. You're right, Raoul. I don't have the stomach for this anymore. Consider this my letter of resignation. I'll find my own way out. After the doctor left, silence dominated the library for a few seconds. It was Carl who broke it. Well, that was unexpected. Forget him, Raoul said, sitting back down. Emmanuel was outdated years ago. Now, back to the plan. We need to find out more about this period when Janine worked for the Millers. Any sordid details, any conflict. And we need someone in the press willing to publish the story the right way. I know a columnist at the Florida Times-Union who would be perfect, Carl offered. He has an old grudge against Arthur, ever since he was barred from a charity gala at St. Christopher's a few years ago. Excellent. Prepare the ground, but don't move yet. I want more ammunition. Flavio, keep digging. I want to know everything about Janine's relationship with the Millers, in detail. And Henry, prepare a plan to lure away St. Christopher's top doctors. When the scandal breaks, I want to be ready to offer irresistible contracts to their talent. As the men continued planning, on the other side of the city at St. Christopher's, a very different scene was unfolding. The new pediatric wing for public assistance patients was being prepared in record time. Walls were being painted in bright colors, state-of-the-art equipment was being installed, and a specialized team was being formed. At the center of this transformation, to the surprise of many, was Beatrice Miller. I want larger windows here, she instructed the architect, pointing to the blueprint spread over a makeshift table in the hallway. These children need natural light, and I want an integrated play area, with books, games, computers, all adapted for children in different stages of treatment. Dr. Richards observed the scene with a discreet smile. He had never imagined seeing Beatrice so involved in something not related to her social status. It was as if the frivolous, superficial woman he had known in recent years was being replaced day by someone closer to the idealistic young doctor she had once been. "You're turning this into a personal project, I see," he commented, approaching her. Beatrice smiled, a genuine smile that had become more frequent in recent weeks. "Let's just say I've found a new purpose, Paul. Or maybe I've rediscovered an old one. It's good to see you like this. It reminds me a lot of the Beatrice I met 20 years ago, when you and Arthur were still residents right here, in the old building of Miami-Dade County General." The mention of that time brought a momentary shadow to Beatrice's face. We were so different then, weren't we? So full of dreams, of ideals. At some point we lost sight of that. Or rather, I did. Arthur just got carried away by my unbridled ambition. Paul placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "The important thing is that you're getting it back now, and making a difference in a way few could." Beatrice nodded, turning her attention back to the blueprint. But something was still bothering her, Paul could tell. "Something else is worrying you, isn't it?" She hesitated, looking around to make sure they wouldn't be overheard. "Sophia," she finally said. "I'm worried about Sophia." "Why? I thought things were going well between you, especially since the incident at the charity tea." "They are. That's the problem, Paul. I'm getting attached to that girl in a way I didn't expect. And Arthur already loves her, as if she were our own daughter. But the temporary custody expires in 2 weeks, and the judge has scheduled a hearing to decide her future." "And you don't want to proceed with the adoption?" "We do. God, how we do. But—" Beatrice lowered her voice even more. "There are complications, things from the past that could interfere." Paul frowned, confused. What kind of complications? Before Beatrice could answer, an urgent call interrupted their conversation. One of the emergency room doctors needed a second opinion on a complex case, and Dr. Richards was the requested specialist. "We'll continue this conversation later," he promised, already walking away. "Dinner at your place this weekend, how about it?" Beatrice just nodded, reluctantly turning her attention back to the blueprint of the new pediatric wing. But her mind was far away, reliving a past she had struggled to bury, and that now threatened to resurface, just when her life finally seemed to be finding a new meaning. Meanwhile, at the private school where Sophia had been studying for just over a month, another drama was unfolding. It was recess, and the girl was sitting alone on a bench in the courtyard, watching other children play. Despite the identical uniform and top-of-the-line school supplies, there was something that still separated her from her classmates, an invisible chasm of experiences, that privileged Miami children could not comprehend. "Can I sit here?" Sophia looked up, surprised. It was Peter, a boy from her class with whom she had exchanged few words since she arrived at the school. Unlike the other children, who treated her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, Peter had always been polite, though distant. "Sure," she replied, sliding over to make room. Peter sat down, opening a pack of cookies he had brought with him. "Want one?" he offered. Sophia hesitated for a moment. Even after weeks living in the Miller mansion, surrounded by comfort and abundance, she still had the reflex of never refusing food, a habit acquired during the months of deprivation on the streets. "Thanks," she said, taking a cookie. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching their classmates play soccer and jump rope. It was Peter who spoke first. "I know what it's like, you know." What's like?" "Being different, not fitting in." Sophia looked at him, intrigued. Peter, with his fair skin, straight hair, and traditional last name, seemed like the perfect example of a child who belonged in that environment. "You? But you're just like everyone else here." Peter smiled, a sad smile that seemed strange on such a young face. "On the outside, maybe. But I'm adopted too. And before that, I went through 3 different foster homes." The revelation took Sophia by surprise. She would never have imagined that this well-adjusted boy had a story similar to hers. "Really? It doesn't seem like it." "Because I learned to pretend," Peter explained, shrugging. "To wear the mask they expect of me, but I saw how you look at all this." He gestured to the school's luxurious courtyard. "Like it's a dream you could wake up from at any moment. I used to look at it that way too." Peter's perception was so accurate that Sophia felt a sudden urge to cry. Since entering the Miller mansion, she had lived with the constant feeling that it was temporary, that at any moment she would wake up back on the streets, hungry and afraid. "Do you think they'll send me away?" Sophia asked, her voice small and insecure. Peter thought for a moment before answering. "I don't know. But if you've been with the Millers this long, it's a good sign. It took my adoptive parents almost a year to finalize my adoption, with all the bureaucracy. But they never gave up." "I'm scared," Sophia admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I'm scared they'll realize I'm not like their daughter who's gone, that I'll never be." Peter took another cookie, chewing slowly as he considered what to say. "My adoptive mum says it's not about replacing someone, it's about finding a new space in your heart, a space that's just yours." The simplicity of the explanation touched Sophia deeply. It was exactly what she needed to hear. Not that she would be a replacement for Louise, but that she could find her own place in Arthur and Beatrice's lives. "Thanks, Peter," she said, smiling genuinely for the first time that day. "Are you going to be my friend now?" The boy smiled back, extending his hand in a surprisingly adult gesture. "I already am." At that moment, as the 2 children sealed a friendship in the school's sunny courtyard, Sophia's fate was being discussed in a stark office in downtown Miami. Francis Gomez, the social worker from St. Christopher's, was meeting with the judge of the family court, Judge Claudia Riley, a woman in her 50s, known for her strictness and adherence to the rules. "I understand the special situation, Francis," the judge was saying, analyzing the file on her desk. "But I can't simply ignore protocols. The Millers may be influential and well-intentioned people, but the law is the same for everyone. No one is asking for special treatment, Judge Riley, just consideration of the unique circumstances of this case. Sophia has developed a strong bond with the couple. She is stable, for the first time in months attending school, receiving the medical and psychological treatment she needs." The judge sighed, taking off her glasses to massage the bridge of her nose. "And as a social worker, do you support the adoption petition?" "I support it fully. I have made several visits to the Miller residence. The environment is loving and stable. Both demonstrate genuine affection for Sophia and a commitment to her well-being." "Even Beatrice?" "The initial reports indicated some resistance on her part." Francis smiled. "If you saw her now, you wouldn't recognize her. The transformation has been remarkable. Sophia has brought out a side of Beatrice that seemed dormant for years." The judge put her glasses back on, flipping through a few more pages of the file. "There's an issue here that concerns me," she said finally. A prior connection between Sophia's biological mother and the Millers. Something about her having worked at their residence years ago. Frances felt a chill run down her spine. She hadn't expected this detail to already be in the file. Yes, we recently discovered that Janine Sanders worked briefly as an assistant nanny at the Miller house when Sophia was a baby. But that was over 7 years ago, and there's no indication that Arthur or Beatrice recognized Sophia when they found her at the hospital. And Janine's departure from the job. It's noted here that it was a contentious dismissal. We are still investigating that. The records are scarce and witnesses from that time are difficult to locate. The judge closed the folder, her face unreadable. Postpone the hearing until next month, Frances. I want more information about this connection before making any decision, and I want to interview Sophia personally, without the Millers present. But Judge Riley, the temporary custody expires in 2 weeks. Then we have 2 weeks to clarify these points, the judge replied, effectively ending the conversation. We are talking about a child's future. I will not make hasty decisions one way or the other. As Frances left the courthouse dejected, her cell phone rang. It was Arthur, anxious for news of the meeting. How did it go? When did the judge schedule the hearing? Frances took a deep breath, searching for the right words to not alarm the businessman too much, but also without hiding the gravity of the situation. Arthur, we need to talk. In person. You and Beatrice. There are complications. And you need to tell me everything, absolutely everything about Janine Sanders and the time she worked in your home. On the other end of the line, Arthur's silence was more eloquent than any response. Finally he spoke, his voice laden with a mixture of fear and determination. We'll sort this out, Frances. There has to be a way. I can't lose Sophia too. I can't. The social worker looked up at the cloudy Miami sky, feeling the first drops of a tropical rain that was on its way. Like the storm forming on the horizon, she knew that turbulent days were ahead for everyone involved in this increasingly complex story. And at its center, innocent and vulnerable, was Sophia, a child who had already lost too much and for whom the newfound stability could once again be only temporary. Chapter 7. New Beginnings. The family court hearing room in Miami was quiet and tense that Friday morning. The air conditioning was on full blast, combating not only the tropical heat, but also the charged atmosphere that dominated the space. Arthur Miller, impeccable in his grey suit, maintained an upright posture, though. His face revealed the sleepless nights of the past few weeks. Beside him, Beatrice displayed a restrained elegance in a discreet navy blue dress, a far cry from the extravagant outfits she used to wear to social events. They held each other's hands, drawing mutual strength for what was to come. On the other side of the room, Frances Gomez spoke in a low voice to Sophia. The girl, dressed in a simple white dress and flats, seemed smaller and more fragile under the fluorescent lights of the courthouse. Her restless eyes darted from Arthur and Beatrice to the door through which the judge would enter at any moment. "Are you okay, Sophia?" Frances asked, sensing the child's nervousness. "Remember what we talked about. You just need to tell the truth when the judge asks you questions. There are no right or wrong answers." Sophia nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the door. "What if she decides I have to leave, to a shelter or somewhere else?" The question, asked in a low voice, carried the full weight of the insecurity Sophia felt. Despite months of stability at the Millers' home, Frances felt her heart ache. How could she explain the adoption system, with all its bureaucratic coldness and unpredictability, to an 8-year-old child who had already lost so much? "We're going to do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen," she answered honestly. "The judge wants what's best for you, Sophia. We all do." Before the girl could ask more questions, the side door opened and everyone stood. Judge Claudia Riley entered, followed by the prosecutor for Child Services, Mark Allen, and the clerk who would record the proceedings. "Good morning, everyone," the judge said after taking her seat. "We are here to decide on the permanent custody of the minor Sophia Sanders, currently under the temporary custody of Mr. Arthur and Mrs. Beatrice Miller. I ask that everyone remain calm and answer only when requested." The formal procedure began with the clerk reading the case report. Sophia listened intently, surprised at how much of her own life was being discussed, from her mother's death to the incident at the hospital, to her grades in school and her sessions with the psychologist. "Before we proceed," the judge said after the reading was finished, "I would like to speak with Sophia in private. I ask that all present leave for a few minutes, except for the social worker, Francis Gomez, who will remain as an observer." Arthur and Beatrice exchanged apprehensive glances, but obeyed without protest. As they left, Beatrice gave Sophia an encouraging smile, which she shyly returned. When the room was emptier, the judge modified her posture, becoming visibly more approachable. She stepped down from her elevated bench and sat in a regular chair close to Sophia. "Hello, Sophia. My name is Claudia. My job is to help children like you find safe and loving homes. Do you understand why we are here today?" Sophia nodded. "To decide if I'm going to stay with Uncle Arthur and Aunt Beatrice forever?" The judge smiled at the simplicity of the answer. "That's right. And to make that decision, I need to know how you feel about living with them. Can you tell me?" Sophia thought for a moment, organizing her thoughts. "I was scared at first," she admitted. "The house is very big and there were a lot of rules I didn't know. And Aunt Beatrice, she didn't like me very much in the beginning." "And now?" the judge encouraged. Sophia's face subtly lit up. "Now it's different. Uncle Arthur has always been good to me since the hospital. He takes me to school every day, even when he has an important meeting, and helps me with my math homework. And Aunt Beatrice, she's changed a lot. Now she combs my hair before bed and tells me stories from when she was a doctor. Sometimes she still gets sad all of a sudden, but then I give her a hug and she feels better." The judge watched attentively, looking for signs that the girl might have been coached to say these things. But Sophia's spontaneity was evident. "And do you remember when your mother worked at their house, when you were very little?" Sophia frowned, confused. "No, I was just a baby. But Aunt Beatrice told me my mum worked there, taking care of Louise." "Louise was their daughter, who passed away. Did you know that?" "Yes. They showed me pictures of her. She had curly hair like me, but her skin was lighter. Aunt Beatrice said, 'I'm not there to replace Louise, that no one can replace anyone, but that we can make a new place in our hearts for new people.'" The answer, so mature for a child, her age, surprised the judge. It was clear that the couple had had honest conversations with Sophia about the past. "And is that what you want, Sophia? To stay with them permanently?" Sophia nodded emphatically. "Yes. I really wish my mum was here, but she's not. And Uncle Arthur and Aunt Beatrice take care of me. They take me to the doctor when I'm sick, they help me with school, and they never, ever let me go to bed hungry." Her voice trembled slightly on the last part, revealing the still fresh scars from the months she had spent on the streets. The judge nodded, understanding. She asked a few more questions about Sophia's routine, about school, about her feelings. Finally, satisfied, she returned to her formal seat. "Thank you, Sophia. You were very brave and honest. Now, I'm going to ask Francis to take you outside for a moment while I talk with Mr. Miller and Mrs. Miller, okay?" Sophia agreed, though reluctant to leave without knowing what would be decided. When the door closed behind her, the judge called the couple back in. Arthur and Beatrice entered, visibly tense. The past 30 days had been an emotional roller coaster. After, the judge requested more information about the connection to Janine Sanders. They were forced to confront a past they had strived to forget. The truth, when it finally came out, was far more complex than the insinuations Flavio Torres had spread to the press. Janine had indeed been hired as an assistant nanny for Louise, bringing little Sophia, then only 6 months old, to live in the maids' quarters of the mansion. For almost a year, she worked for the family, forming a particularly close bond with Louise, who adored baby Sophia. But then the unthinkable happened. Louise was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive disease. The months that followed were a time of desperation for the Millers. Consultations with specialists, experimental treatments, trips abroad in search of cures that American medicine did not yet offer. And amidst the chaos, Beatrice, consumed by the pain and fear of losing her daughter, became a different person, bitter, impatient, unfair to those around her. It was in this context that the incident with Janine occurred. After a particularly difficult day, when the doctors had given a grim prognosis for Louise, Beatrice returned home distraught. She found Janine rocking Sophia, singing softly, while Louise slept in her room alone. Something broke in Beatrice at that moment. In a fit of irrational rage, she accused Janine of neglecting Louise to care for her own daughter. The words were harsh, cruel, unjust. Janine, hurt and indignant, defended herself, but Beatrice was beyond reason. She ended up firing her that same night, paying only what was legally required, without any additional compensation. Arthur, focused on the fight for Louise's life and partially absent due to trips in search of treatments, learned of the dismissal only days later, when it was too late to reverse the situation. Janine had disappeared, taking Sophia with her. A month later, Louise passed away, and in the following years, consumed by grief and guilt, neither of them ever mentioned Janine or Sophia again, until that fateful day at the hospital, when fate brought them face to face with the result of their past actions. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller," the judge began, bringing them back to the present. "After reviewing all the reports, testimonies, and, most importantly, after hearing from Sophia, I am ready to make a decision." The couple sat, their hands still intertwined, their faces tense with expectation. "In recent days," the judge continued, "I have received not only the detailed report from social worker Francis Gomez, but also letters of support from Dr. Paul Richards, from Dr. Carmen Silveira, the psychologist who is counseling Sophia, and even a formal statement from the City Health Department attesting to the humanitarian work you have been doing through St. Christopher's." Arthur nodded, grateful for the unexpected support. The last few weeks had been difficult not only because of the adoption issue, but also because of the attacks the hospital had been suffering in the press. The revelation about the prior connection with Janine had been used by his competitors to question the sincerity of his philanthropic transformation. "I also read with attention," the judge went on, "the detailed account you provided about the period when Janine Sanders worked in your residence and the circumstances of her dismissal." Beatrice looked down, the shame still vivid even after so many years. "I am not here to judge past actions," the judge clarified, sensing the discomfort, "especially actions taken in a moment of extreme personal suffering. What matters to me is the present and, above all, Sophia's future." She paused, organizing her thoughts before continuing. "What I see today are two people who, despite their past mistakes, and we all make them, are genuinely committed to the well-being of a child who desperately needed a home. I see a transformation not only personal, but institutional, that will benefit countless other children. And most importantly, I see in Sophia a girl who, after so much instability and loss, has finally found security and love." Arthur and Beatrice exchanged hopeful glances, barely daring to believe the direction the hearing was taking. "Therefore," the judge announced, "it is my decision to grant permanent custody of Sophia Sanders to Mr. Arthur and Mrs. Beatrice Miller with a view to full adoption, which may be formalized after the 1-year monitoring period as required by law." The words hung in the air for a moment as the couple absorbed their meaning. Then, in a gesture unusual for the formal setting of a courtroom, Arthur hugged Beatrice, both letting tears flow freely. "Thank you, Judge Riley," Beatrice said, when she could finally speak. "I promise we will dedicate our lives to giving Sophia everything she deserves." "I have no doubt you will," the judge replied with a discreet smile. "And to start, why don't you go outside and give her the news? I think someone is quite anxious." In the courthouse hallway, Sophia waited with Francis, her feet swinging nervously on the chair that was too high for her. When the hearing room door opened and she saw the emotional faces of Arthur and Beatrice, her heart raced. "So?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Arthur knelt in front of her, bringing himself to her eye level. "Sophia, the judge has decided that you're going to stay with us. If that's what you want, of course." The girl's face lit up with a smile so radiant, it seemed to illuminate the entire gloomy courthouse hallway. "Forever?" "Forever," Beatrice confirmed, kneeling beside her husband as well. "We'll be a family, Sophia. A real family." Sophia threw herself into their arms in a tight hug that said more than any words could express. At that moment, it didn't matter that photographers were starting to gather at the courthouse entrance, tipped off by a discreet employee, nor that reporters would surely turn this decision into a headline the next day. What mattered were the three hearts that, after so many detours, losses and pains, had finally found each other, in a new beginning. 3 months later, the transformation of St. Christopher's Hospital was complete. The new pediatric wing for public assistance patients, named the Janine Sanders Wing, a tribute suggested by Sophia, had already treated over 200 children who might not otherwise have had access to specialized treatments. The pioneering partnership model between the private and public sectors was already beginning to be replicated in other cities in the southeast. And to the surprise of many, even the rival Vita network had recently announced a similar initiative, albeit on a smaller scale. Raoul Matthews' attempt to discredit the Millers by using their past with Janine had backfired. When the full story came to light, not as a conspiracy to exploit Sophia, but as a journey of redemption and transformation, public opinion decisively sided with Arthur and Beatrice. And most surprisingly, Dr. Emmanuel Santana, the doctor who had resigned from the Vita network in protest of Raoul's tactics, was now directing the social program at St. Christopher's, bringing with him decades of experience and an unwavering commitment to humanized medicine. On that sunny Sunday afternoon, the Miller mansion, now officially Sophia's home too, was busier than usual. A small party had been organized to celebrate the girl's 9th birthday, bringing together some school friends, including Peter, who had become her best friend, the medical team that had been with her since the hospital, and Francis, who continued to visit regularly as part of the monitoring for the final adoption. In the garden decorated with colorful balloons, Sophia ran and played with the other children, her healthy, tanned face unrecognizable compared to the pale, malnourished girl who had staggered into St. Christopher's months before. Mrs. Eleanor, proud as a grandmother, commanded the team, serving snacks, sweets, and a huge cake decorated with a superhero theme, Sophia's new passion, who now dreamed of being a doctor to save people like Uncle Arthur saved me. In a quieter corner of the garden, Arthur watched the scene with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in many years. Beatrice approached, linking her arm in his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, following his gaze to Sophia, who was now teaching a circle game to some friends. "About how life comes full circle," he replied thoughtfully. "A year ago we were lost. I had a financial empire, but I had forgotten why we built it in the first place. You were unhappy, though you pretended not to be. We were two strangers living under the same roof, united only by the memory of a daughter we lost." Beatrice nodded, resting her head on her husband's shoulder. "And now? Now we have Sophia. And through her, we've recovered something I thought we had lost forever, a purpose, a chance to make a real difference." Beatrice smiled, watching the group of children who were now heading to the cake table, eager for the moment to sing Happy Birthday. "I think Louise would approve," she said softly. "In fact, I'm sure she would." Arthur gently kissed his wife's forehead, feeling a gratitude that transcended words. Not just for Sophia, but for the journey she had initiated. A journey of healing, not just for a girl who had almost died for lack of medical care, but for a couple who had become lost in their own success, for a hospital that had forgotten its original mission, and for an entire community that was now beginning to rethink the meaning of health as a right, not a privilege. "Come on, Dad," Sophia called, waving excitedly. "Let's sing Happy Birthday." The words, so simple, so powerful, hit Arthur like a ray of light. Dad. It was the first time Sophia had called him that. Until then, it had always been Uncle Arthur, even after the court's decision. With teary eyes, Arthur squeezed Beatrice's hand, and together they walked to the cake table, where Sophia awaited them with a smile that held all the future they had dared to dream of together. At St. Christopher's Hospital, the receptionist Victoria, who had kept her job after undergoing intensive training in humanized care, received a girl of about 10, barefoot and in simple clothes. Beside her, a woman who appeared to be her grandmother explained in broken English that the girl had had a high fever for 3 days. Full name? Victoria asked, with a genuine smile. Maria Edwards, the grandmother replied, clearly surprised by the warm reception. But we don't have insurance, just public assistance. No problem, Ma'am, Victoria assured her, vividly remembering that other girl almost a year ago, whose fate had transformed not only the hospital, but everyone who was touched by her story. Here at St. Christopher's, all children are treated, no exceptions. As Maria Edwards was led to triage, Sophia's legacy continued to spread, proving that sometimes it only takes one child to change an entire system, to awaken sleeping hearts, and to remind everyone that true wealth is not in what we possess, but in what we are able to offer to others.